Hey there learners, Niamh here, and I have a video that is a little bit different than other videos that I've done on my site or on my channel here. I'm hoping to do more of these because I'm actually planning on revamping my channel here, moving my gaming videos to a more appropriate channel and really focusing this channel on language learning and genealogy. And this is one of my first genealogy videos. In fact, I think it is the only one I've had on here. So this is kind of a new fun experiment for me. So I am very huge into genealogy. It's something I just really enjoy doing. My dad and I have, researched our family tree back hundreds and hundreds of years. There are so many names on our family tree. It's over 7,000, and I can easily see it getting to 8,000 people on our family tree, within a couple months, So anyway, despite this, the fact that we're very into genealogy and we have a huge family tree, we have an entire section of our tree missing. And it's fairly recent. It's, I would say, so it's not my dad, it's not my grandpa, it is my great-grandpa. His father is unknown to us. So this is part of my journey in trying to solve a 100-year-old family mystery. So let's explore this. So let's start with me. There I am. Yep, that's me. So my dad, then my grandpa, and here's all three of us. So this, so far, our little mini family tree here, our paternal line. So my grandfather's father was Vernon Helmer Scott. He was born in 1914 and he died in 1942 in Missouri. Sad story. He was obviously quite young when he died. He was actually murdered, and it's still an unsolved crime in Kansas. But this is not about his murder. That's kind of a different subject altogether. This is my my great-grandfather Vernon. This is about who my great-grandfather's father is. Yep, big mystery. So let's explore that a bit. Vernon Helmer Scott. So he was born Helmer Hunt. Helmer Hunt, Vernon Helmer Scott, born 1914, and it was in Missouri. His birth mother is Edna Hunt, and she was born 1892, and she died in 1983. And Edna, she was about 22 years old when Helmer was born, and she was an unwed mother, and she gave her child up for adoption. Helmer Hunt was adopted by John and Susie Scott, and then they changed his name to Vernon Helmer Scott. So there we go. And this is the one clue that Edna left for us. She insisted that the adoptive parents keep the name Helmer, hence Vernon's middle name. Now, the reason why this is kind of, a significant clue is because Helmer is a rather unusual name, even at the time, and it's an ethnic Swedish name, and as far as we know, Edna wasn't even remotely Swedish, and there were no Helmers on Edna's side of the family, so it's kind of peculiar that she would insist on such an unusual Swedish name. So our hope and possibly wishful thinking is that Helmer was the name of Vernon's father, and that he was possibly of Swedish descent. So, possible father of Vernon. All right, so my dad has been searching for this for decades. I don't know how long he's been searching, but and he had found like a Helmer here or a Helmer there, but nothing that really tied to our Helmer, our Vernon Helmer Scott. So I searched for Helmers in the county and the around surrounding cities or towns where Vernon was born. I searched for the first name Helmer, and surprisingly, I found the 1900 census from Lynn County, Missouri, and this is in Buckland, the town of Buckland. Now, on this, I found a family where the last name is Bachman or Bachman. It's a Swedish name, and I looked up the spelling, and sometimes it's spelled with like two little dots on the first A. So I keep saying it Bachman, but I looked it up, and it might be pronounced Beckman. So I'm probably going to use the pronunciation Bachman for the rest of this video, but I'm unsure of the pronunciation. Anyway, so in this family, there was a boy about 14 years old named Helmer, and he is listed as being born in 1886 in Lynn County, Missouri. So he is about 6 years older than Edna. All right, that puts him about in the age range that we would imagine the father of Vernon Helmer to be. So his parents were of Swedish descent. They, in fact, I don't know if you can see right here, but they were born in Sweden. And this one here for Matilda, the wife, it says she was born in Missouri, but in other records it says she was born in Sweden, and both of her parents were born in Sweden. So there we go. Next. So let's explore this Helmer Bachman. So his parents are listed as John Peter and Matilda Bachman, with sisters Hulda and Alice. Now, I found a marriage certificate of John and Matilda, and they were married in 1896. Now, this was confusing because both Helmer and Hulda were born well before 1896. Now, of course, that, people can have children outside of marriage, but for the time, that's rather unlikely. So then I did some more digging, and that's when I found out that Matilda is actually Helmer and Hulda's stepmother, and that their mother was named Mary, and I found some references to a possible maiden name of Swanson, Svanson, Svensson, something like that, something along those lines. So I found their mother, and she actually died in 1894, and she was also a Swedish immigrant. Now, then John married Matilda in 1896, and Alice is their daughter. So here's the list of John and Mary's children. There's a third child there, Victor. I did find him on that 1900 census. He was actually a little bit further up. He was living with his grandparents. I don't know why, but he was living with his grandparents. There were some Bachmans further up, and they were John Peter's parents, and there was Victor in their family. All right, and John and Matilda had 4 children, Alice, Carl, Esther, and Herbert. So then I started to find a lot more records on an Elmer J. or Elmer John Bachman, and instead of Helmer. And these the Elmer John Bachman had the same birth date, same birth location, Swedish parents. Basically, there was enough evidence to indicate that Helmer Bachman and Elmer John Bachman were the same person. And he probably started to go by Elmer because Elmer is an English name, and it probably just made for more opportunity for him to not have such an ethnic name, so especially considering the time. So that makes sense. Helmer and Elmer John Bachman are the same person. So around 1908, I don't know if it was exactly in 1908, but there was a lot of things that happened after 1908 in Colorado. So around 1908 is when Helmer moved to Colorado. And there he married Jenny and had 3 daughters. Now, Jenny is actually the same age as Edna, Vernon Helmer's birth mother. So they had 3 daughters, and at this point, I am not putting first names or middle names because at this point, we're getting to where we could possibly still have living people. I mean, of course, it would be over 100 here, but it's possible. And I know that this HC is dead, has passed away, and I assume EV has passed away. And it's likely that MM has also passed away. We're at the point now where we can track living relatives, so I'm just going to abbreviate names. All right, so if you've been following the story and haven't been too bored, then you probably noticed a little bit of a hiccup in the theory here. So let's explore that. Helmer moved to Colorado around 1908. He married Jenny in 1909. I have a marriage certificate for them. And his daughters were all born in Colorado. And if we remember correctly from the previous slide, his daughters were born in 1910, 1912, and 1917. Now, if we remember, Vernon was born in 1914 in Missouri. So, that could be the be-all and end-all. A lot of people would say, well, that just proves it. Helmer Bachman isn't the father of Vernon. He was living in Colorado. All 3 of his daughters were born there. He married there. How could he have fathered a child in Missouri in 1913? Because Vernon was born in 1914. So how could he have fathered a child in Missouri? And that's true. I mean, that's a conundrum. How could he have done that? And it is true that I may be way off track, but I believe there is a very, very plausible explanation. And let's explore that. So, all of Helmer's family lived in Linn County, Missouri. We're talking his dad, his stepmother, all 6 of his siblings, his grandparents, probably some aunts and uncles who I've also traced a little bit. They were all living in Buckland, Linn County, Missouri. Now, most of his immediate family members lived there their whole lives. A couple of them did move away, but most of them lived there their whole lives, like died there. Some of them in their old age, some of them fairly young. But they, 90% of them stayed in Buckland, Linn County, Missouri. So, what does that mean? How does that indicate that it's possible that Helmer still fathered a child in Missouri? Well, all right, so Helmer moved to Colorado, got married, and had children. Do we assume that he never saw his family ever again, that he moved away to Colorado and just completely cut off cut off all contact with them, never visited them, never saw them again. Well, that's possible. It's certainly possible. It depends on his relationship with his family, but I haven't found any evidence that there was any ill feelings with his family members. So I think it's pretty conceivable that Helmer visited his family in 1913. And to further explore that idea, and I don't have a slide for this, but I did research what kinds of vehicles existed at the time, what kind of vehicles were readily available, like that you could buy commercially, and how fast they went, and what roads were like even. And I came to the conclusion through some math and just general variables that it would take probably 2 to 7 days for Helmer and possibly the rest of his brood to travel from where they lived in Colorado to Buckland, Linn County, Missouri. It would, if they went really slow and took a ton of breaks and like a lot of breaks, it would be closer to 7 days. But if they only took a few breaks and went fairly fast, then it could take 2 days or even less. So I think that is a really reasonable number of days that it would take them to get from one place to another to visit family. And if you're going to travel for about a week or a little less than a week to get somewhere, you're probably going to stay there for a long time. It's probably not going to be a weekend visit. It's likely going to be at least a few weeks. And I think that's plenty of time to get sweet with Edna. Yes. So it's a hiccup in the theory. I acknowledge it. But I think there's a reasonable explanation for why it's possible that he fathered a child in Missouri in 1913, even though he was living in Colorado. All right, so let's move on. So what will confirm this? Well, DNA, of course. That's really the only thing that's going to really confirm the theory, because everything else is going to help indicate that it might be true, but really, when it comes down to it, DNA, like from 23andMe, Ancestry.com, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage DNA, etc., etc. So I did test through 23andMe. I just got my results yesterday, and I did do a little reaction video, which I'll put in the next video. And my dad has kind of gone back and forth on whether he was going to use 23andMe or Ancestry, and I think he finally settled on 23andMe, so he's eventually going to do that. And he's also going to buy a kit for my grandfather. And I don't know if he's going to buy him one for 23andMe or Ancestry, but yeah. So I have been in contact with one of the descendants of Helmer Bachman, and she is excited to help. She's interested in this story, in this theory, but she's not sure that she wants to do DNA testing. So, and she's possibly going to talk to her other family members, but really it's all up in the air whether they'll do a DNA test or not. So it would be great, because that's how we would definitely confirm it, is if we matched with descendants of Helmer Bachman. But we'll see how that goes. That might not be an option. All right, so if that's not an option, if we can't get any of his descendants to agree to testing through one of the companies, what else can the DNA tell us? Well, one of the main things is Scandinavian Ancestry. Now, I don't have any Scandinavian ancestors on any other side of my tree. There's absolutely none on my dad's side that we've been able to find. I'm sure if we went far back, we might find some Scandinavian ancestor, but probably not enough to really pass down enough DNA. Same on my mom's side. There's always been sort of these rumors that we had some sort of Scandinavian DNA on our ancestors on my mom's side, but I've done extensive genealogical research and just traced my mom's side of the family for many generations, and there is not a single ancestor there. There's no other Swedish, Norwegian, or Danish ancestors in my tree. So that would indicate that any Scandinavian ancestry would prove it, right? Well, no, because remnant Viking ancestry is still in a lot of British ancestry. And through my genealogical research, we are heavily of English descent. So it's possible that we would have a little bit of Viking in us, a little bit of Scandinavian. But I don't think that, the little bit of remnant Viking ancestry from our British ancestors would really amount to a lot of percentage with Scandinavian ancestry. So I'm not, if this whole question of Scandinavian ancestry wasn't here, I wouldn't expect more than 1%, maybe 2%, of Scandinavian DNA. Now, if my Swedish ancestor, if I had one, was 100% Swedish, if my second great-grandparent was 100% Swedish, I could expect between 3 and 6, maybe up to 7% Scandinavian ancestry, mainly because if all of that came down and I had absolutely no other Scandinavian ancestry, it would be about 6.25%. But that, that varies. We don't get all of our DNA from each parent who doesn't get all of they don't get all of each section of the DNA from their parents, et cetera. So there's a range, and I'd expect about 3 to 6% Scandinavian ancestry. My dad and his siblings and his first cousins could expect probably around 7 to 12 or 13%. And of course, the generation before that, it would be probably about 15 to 25%, somewhere in there, right? So yeah, that's the general breakdown. I can expect about that range of Scandinavian ancestry. Now, of course, that doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that Helmer Bachman is my great-great-grandfather. It just indicates strongly that my great-great-grandfather was of Swedish or Scandinavian descent. So yeah, but that's a big clue. Another big clue is the YDNA haplogroup of my dad or his brother or his dad, etc., the male line. Now, I'm probably going to get a bunch of people in the comments saying that doesn't prove anything. That's not how haplogroups work. Blah, 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 blah. And here's the thing. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's not how haplogroups work. The most common Y haplogroup for Scandinavia is I1 or IM253. There are other haplogroups that are common in Scandinavia, and because of those Viking raids and other things like that, I1 does show up in British people as well. So, seeing possibly this haplogroup among with my dad, it really doesn't prove anything. It's less evidence than our Swedish ancestry, the percentage that we get for that. But it's a step forward. It is one tiny additional thing that we can add to the evidence. It wouldn't stand up in court at all, of course, but it is something that can kind of help guide us. So when my dad takes his DNA test, and 23andMe does provide a base level haplogroup for YDNA and mitochondrial DNA, so you can get a general idea of where your haplogroups are from. I obviously won't get a YDNA haplogroup because I don't have a Y chromosome because I'm a girl. So, so I'd be interested in knowing what my dad's haplogroup is. And like I said, it could be a lot of different things. There's like 3 big ones that are in Scandinavia, the biggest being I1. And I1 is kind of seen in Britain and those regions. So it's not conclusive evidence by any means. It's just a tiny bit of evidence that we might be able to put in the category of a Swedish great-great-grandfather. All right, so another thing is comparing DNA matches between myself, my dad, and my grandfather. So when they test, 23andMe will pair up our DNA, and they'll go through the next step called phasing. Where they will figure out, because right now they can see what genes that I have, what DNA that I have. They just don't know which of those came from my father and which came from my mother. And my mother's also testing too, so that also will help. So once you attach a parent or parents, once they test and they're part of the system, 23andMe will go through a process called phasing. And the percentages that you initially received might change a little bit. Basically, it just becomes more accurate as they connect offspring with parents. Now, I will then be able to look at the combined matches of my dad and me and my grandfather. And from there, we can kind of narrow down and see if there's anyone that seems like it might be the descendants of our great-great-grandfather, our missing ancestor. Let's put it that way. So another option, though, after doing all of this, another DNA clue, would be if we found the descendants of Helmer's siblings. Because right now, the issue is that Helmer's descendants, as far as we know, only one of his children had children, and as far as we know, only one of them had children, but it's possible the other one had long-lost children as well. And so our pool of descendants from Helmer's line is actually quite small. And that's a little disappointing only because it's less likely that any of them have tested. And I know from talking to the one descendant that she hasn't tested, and she's kind of iffy on testing, so, which I don't want to push her or anything. That's totally her decision. So I'm just a weirdo asking questions, So, yes. So, but one of our other options is to look at the descendants of Helmer's siblings. So that's even one more generation removed. So let's explore that option real quick. So, Helmer's siblings. So let's start with John Peter Bachman. That is Helmer's father. He was born in 1857 in Sweden. And his first wife was Mary Svensson or Swanson. We're not sure the exact last name. And she was also from Sweden. We also don't know her birth date. Now, they had 3 children, Helmer being the oldest. And then they had Hulda Bachman, a.k.a. Becky. And this is where I think the last name might be pronounced Beckman instead of Bachman, because like one source I had seen said Beckman. Hulda's name was Hulda Grace Frances Beckman or Bachman, and she was nicknamed Becky, so probably from the last name. So she married Edward Creedler. They had 2 children, so that's great. They had 2 children. But I cannot find any evidence that they had children. So there's this big question. She had 2 children, but did she have grandchildren? I'm not sure. So then we have Victor Bachman, or Beckman, and unfortunately he died young. He died in 1912. There was no known spouse or children, so there's a dead end. Then we've got to move over to John Peter's second wife, Alvina Matilda Olsen. She was born in 1870 in Sweden, but possibly born in Missouri. There's conflicting information on that, but her parents were from Sweden. So they had 4 children together. Their first was Alice Bachman, who married Charles Yermers or Yermers. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. I only know of one child that they had, and I cannot find any source saying that they had any grandchildren. So here we are at another dead end here. So yes, we found three grandchildren from John Peter, 3 nieces and nephews from Helmer, but no descendants from them. So then we move to Carl Bachman, who married Gertrude Dowell. No children. Their obituary indicated that they were long married and they never had children. So dead end. Then there's Herbert Bachman. Even less information. He never married and he has no known children. So dead end again. Now, finally, their last child here, Esther Bachman. She married Austin Jenkins, and she had at least 3 or 4 children. A lot of the family trees that I see on Ancestry list just 2 children for them, but I found a census record that had possibly 2 more. One of them may be the same child. It's hard to say. So that's why I said 3 to 4 children, because I'm not exactly sure. But 2 of those children, the 2 that people seem to have in their trees, they ended up having children and grandchildren. So that brings us some possibilities. Now, the downside here is that Esther Bachman Jenkins, already with the descendants of Helmer, they're like our half family, because we only share one ancestor, and that is Helmer Bachman. We don't share the same mother. You know, his ancestors were descendants of Helmer and Jenny, and if Helmer is the father of Vernon, then we are the descendants of Helmer and Edna. So the descendants of Helmer and Jenny are our half family. Now, if we go back, if we're going to a sibling, that means our common ancestor is John Peter Bachman. And that means that there's also a half going on, because there's, as far as we know, no descendants of Mary Svensson. So we would be going through Alvina Matilda, and that means that we again have even less of a chance of connecting with these descendants, even if we are related. So that does put a bit of a damper on that, but hopefully maybe I can find the descendants there and contact them, and maybe they might help me out, or maybe I will see their names somewhere on our DNA tests. All right, so that brings us to the end here. Hopefully that wasn't too boring, but this is all the basic evidence that I have for Helmer Bachman, or Beckman, not sure how to pronounce the last name, Helmer Bachman being the biological father of my great-grandfather, Vernon Helmer Scott. So stay tuned for part 2, the DNA results. And I'm going to tell you right now, a little bit of a spoiler. We obviously haven't connected with any of Helmer's descendants yet. Like I said, the known ones haven't tested. So, yeah. So it's a bit, but there are other clues, like I said, other DNA clues that we will go over, and maybe we can add some more evidence. And of course, people are testing all the time, so we will get new DNA matches with distant relatives all the time. So that's definitely something that I'm looking forward to. So stay tuned for part 2 for my DNA results. Thanks for watching, guys. Later learners. Bye.